No mai, haere mai, and welcome to Exchange Cafe, where together we have the solutions. I'm here today with two fabulous guests, Kerry Hudson from the GDC and John Hitchens. Now, John, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Thanks, Shannon. Great to be here. So I'm Hutch Consulting, Wellington-based, but I roam right around the country, specialise in environmental sustainability challenges. My skill is public policy, but I also work on business cases, regional development related projects. Came out of the government machine, but been working as a consultant for 10 or 15 years, largely with local government, interestingly, but a chunk of time in Fonterra had me understand private sector business.
Great. Yes, we've been offline before this talking about regional economic strategies, and yeah, you seem like a wealth of knowledge there. And Kerry, do you want to introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. My name's Kerry Hudson. I actually grew up in the Manawatu, but I have strong ties to the Gisborne region right back to the 1870s. I came here as Soil Conservator, East Cape Catchment Board in 1982. I came for 3 years and I haven't gone home. It is such an interesting area. It's got a bit of everything going on here. I've seen some pretty big events here, Cyclone Bowler, Ngā flood, and more recently Gabrielle and Harley. They've been really significant events in our region. Land management in the Gisborne region, we were at the forefront of a lot of New Zealand early on because we have such this big erosion problem. And any book you find on land management, soil conservation, Gisborne is mentioned throughout with some of the worst erosion we've got in New Zealand.
And I guess that gets us on to the point today, which is the Transition Advisory Group, which I believe both of you are heavily involved in and heading up, essentially. And we could start with an overview of what that is and another acronym for us to remember of TAG, right?
Yeah, the TAG. So Transition Advisory Group is a grouping of local people. We thought it very important to have locals with a lot of expertise in Tairāwhiti because we do have some very unique problems. We believe that group has the solutions to where we need to go as a region. We've got a wide range of expertise in their land uses, so right across all land uses, community involvement, a lot of tangata whenua involvement, people with very specialised interests in the likes of carbon, ETS, indigenous plants, whole range of other species, alternative species, and several council staff with a range of backgrounds in there as well, from biodiversity right through to land management, and we're facilitated by John. We started in about July. It's a thing we've been putting together for some time. We've got really neat support from our CEO, and we've had a very positive few months moving forward with a group of really neat people.
And John, do you want to give us a kind of the why it was established? And I guess on top of that, what does success look like? Because there's got to be context and there's got to be an outcome, right?
Yes. So Gabrielle was a huge wake-up call, and we can't forget history. We had 150 odd years of land development, a lot of it strongly incentivised, and then some period of soil conservation, and then along came Bowler, plant pines, work well. We can't blame the decisions of the time. ETS came, pushed the pines way out to the ridge, way down to the river. Gabrielle came, revealed very clearly, and Hekia Parata's ministerial inquiry for land use emphasised it, said maybe we haven't got the right trees and the right land use in the right place. So transition is about moving from A to B. B is more resilient land use, more sustainable land use, and that's the core kaupapa of the TAG group.
Yeah, I guess we can't blame Pine, but at the same time, you'd say that the approach taken has failed somewhat in the necessity to meet the desired outcomes of the stabilisation of land. So going on from there, do we have the science? Do we have the knowledge? Do we have the data to implement something that will succeed in that challenging environment?
Oh yeah, I think we've got a lot of examples in this region of what has been success and what success looks like. We just haven't got them replicated enough. Coupled with that, we've got a lot of very recent emerging science to progress where we are going. So we've got a very, very varied region with a whole lot of types of land, and some of it is not sustainable in the land uses we've got now, but it's not all of it by any means. We've got some very good land for farming, forestry in this region. We've got land that actually needs to be taken out of both of them, but it's a matter of getting the land's capability and the land use right to couple them and realign them better than we have. It's a case-by-case approach that we are looking at, and it's really critical that there is no one-size-fits-all, as we've seen in the past. So we need to realise that we've got some very good land, and we've got land that needs to be in long-term vegetation for the sustainable good of our region.
So key research input was stuff from Massey, Niwa, and Mike, who's been doing gully erosion work here forever. Say, all right, we need a map. And it's another of those acronyms, LO3B, Land Overlay 3B. And what it identified was land with very high susceptibility to erosion that happened to be close to a river. So you combine those two parameters and you're able to then say, well, there's 60,000 hectares in Tairāwhiti that really needs permanent canopy cover if the soil and the trees for most of the time are going to stay on the hill. And that was the primary piece of research, I think, Kerry, that is our driver.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got two key aspects to the research we're here, as John mentioned. We did landslide susceptibility, so that's the slips, that's the stuff you see after the big rain, the stuff that's very visible, and we had some really cutting edge technology that Landcare Research put together quite recent, and we've determined where we've got a lot of land slips, and then are they connected to our waterways? So connectivity is really critical here. We also have done some really good assessments through Mike Martin and Ministry of Primary Industries on gully erosion. So we've coupled those two layers, one on gullies, one on landslides together to come up with the designation John mentioned. And yeah, there is a big area of land that's vulnerable to ongoing storm events, and we need to have permanent vegetation on that.
So when I was on council, which is a little while ago now, we talked about Land Overlay 3A, 3B being the new classification. I assume there's both of those that are targeted for permanent vegetation, is that right? Or is it just 3B at this stage?
Yeah, 3A and 3B are a little different. 3A is land we need effective tree cover, and that could be harvested. It just depends on what land we've got there. 3B is land we actually need in permanent vegetation going forward, that it's not intended to be clearfield harvested, it needs to be permanent. Okay. There may be some carbon issues we can deal with. In the farming situation, a lot of farms have already got that land in trees. So the intention here is we want permanent cover on 3B. Where on 3A, there was some productive value on quite a lot of that.
Okay. And how much land are we talking about? Is it a big chunk of our economy that's going to disappear out of use of that land?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and we're looking at it really closely. So across farming and forestry in our region, we're looking at something like about 60,000 hectares of total land area. So, but within that sounds quite a big amount of land, but within that we have quite a lot of land that you wouldn't call productive. So it's erosion prone. And so the productive aspect of the 60,000 hectares is only a smaller proportion. We've also got quite a bit of land in there near waterways, some of our iconic erosion features like Tarndale and Barton's Gully that are untreatable, and they're certainly within the 60,000 hectares. So there's a total of 60,000 hectares, but in terms of productive land, significantly less.
Yeah.
And it's where all our problems lie in terms of slash, ongoing erosion, sediment comes out of those areas.
So the concept of planting 60,000 hectares is not a small feat, obviously. What cost implication are we imagining? What does it cost for a hectare of planting or transition at the current price?
Yeah, absolutely right, Shannon. And we're doing the deep dive now. What are the input costs to get from A to B, the transition? And indeed, the primary purpose of the Transition Advisory Group is guidelines for how best to get from A to B. So those two things are important inputs. And so when you add up the sort of costs, you'll get quite a lot of Indigenous revegetation. There'll be quite a lot of plant and pest work. There'll be quite a lot of advice work. There may well be a need for a nursery. There'll be a need for a quality workforce to help with the transition. So you get all of these input costs that we're in the process of now building up into a cost-benefit assessment and a business case that you always have to do with these exercises to justify that transition that we need to do.
Ooh, that's a big term, justifying the transition.
Yeah.
Is it not already justified?
Oh, I think for all of us in this room that is the case, but your real question that you didn't ask was, so who's going to pay for this? And,
Well, I was going to get to that, I'm sure.
It heads inching towards, well, we should probably build a business case here, and perhaps the Crown may see that this is a very valid subject upon which to make a contribution.
Yeah, I'm going to skip down my list here a little bit because I guess any suggestion of reducing economic activity is often considered a radical decision. Yeah. It's unpalatable for many.
You raise a really interesting point. I've looked at this very closely through farming and forestry. We looked at a property in the back of Ruatoria a few years ago, and we took 16% of the total area out of its current use, and it was put into eucalyptus for carbon, running the same number of stock. We've taken a big part of the erosion problem out of that property. So we're looking at effective land use, not total areas. Same in the forest industry. There are areas in there, particularly near waterways. People are not finding those particularly profitable, so why are we going there? There is productive land clear of the land we're looking at changing the land use on, getting a permanent vegetation cover on. So the types of land we're looking at taking out is nowhere near as productive as what the better country upslope is.
Okay. So the economic activity of the individual landowner stays the same, but potentially with an added carbon income, but at the cost of potentially the government, because I don't see the community can't bear the cost.
Yeah. So we're taking land that is currently not productive and putting it into perhaps some form of permanent vegetation where people will get carbon. We're solving the erosion problem is perhaps the most important aspect. And on the remainder of the property, people are carrying the same amount of stock or growing very good trees. So a reduced area may be quite a bit more profitable. And we also, in the farming situation, we have an alternative income through those areas that are in carbon, which are on marginal land.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we need to see it in the round. And we tend to think about dollars in a narrow sense. Ecosystem values are critical. The value of a cube of soil that stays on the hill needs to be factored in. Ecological values need to be factored in. And that fancy word externalities, when you get the effects off-site that have cost impact on everybody else, they need to be factored in to get around on your equation of cost and benefit.
So we're one region with some very specific challenges of our own. Our erodibility is obvious in comparison to most areas. Have we seen any comparative investment from the Crown at the level that would be required to even start changing this problem?
Well, I think we've seen some of the incentives that have been there in the past. They've been pretty much one size fits all, but they have been big injections of subsidy or grant into our area. We're going to need something similar to do that. We need to have assistance on land that we are taking out of the existing land use and establishing permanent cover on. That's where the incentives will be required. But it's not just the planting or allowing them to revert. It's also, as John mentioned earlier, it's the pest control, and the pests include animal pests, goats, deer, but also plant pests. And one of our real plant issues here are regenerating forestry species or wilding pines.
So do we have enough evidence to show that native species are going to be a substantial part of this transition, or is it a really broad mix? And obviously sentimental to native planting, and a lot of people would desire that, but what's the concept at the moment?
Like, we have got a wonderful array of indigenous plant species in this region. It's a matter of getting the right ones in the right place. The situation may well be that there's a range of species, both indigenous and exotic, get us down the path we need to go down. Indigenous can be established as either reversion, so just doing the pest control, getting rid of the plant pests and letting the ground revert. That is 100% eco-source. That's a really important point. Planting of indigenous, but there will be areas where the other exotics, land carrying trees that coppice, so a tree like a eucalyptus or an acacia, you cut it down, it doesn't die, it grows back from the roots again. There's some huge advantages for that sort of species out there, but I think it's going to be a patchwork, and a lot of our indigenous species are going to play quite a part in this. Planted manuka, planted carnica initially really helpful, but it's a little bit case by case where we might go with that. We do need some fast growing exotics in places that over time may be removed to allow the indigenous to come through. We've got to be very, very flexible in how we progress this.
So you mentioned the large, the Brains Trust that's behind it. You've got individuals from all sorts of sectors. Probably are aware that we've recently been covering the Citizens Assembly process here as well. Do the Citizens Assembly factor in decision making here? Is there a way that they can contribute?
Oh, absolutely, and very good workshop with some of our TAG members, myself and Kerry and other experts 3 weeks ago. And what you're doing is getting the view from a very robustly selected broad spectrum of the community, and we're quite excited about what they may produce in terms of recommendations and guidelines from bottom up around a just transition process. They'll be a very valuable input to our thinking.
There's a wide range of backgrounds amongst the Citizens Assembly. We're taking them on a field trip through the southern part of the region this coming weekend, and they'll see the wide range of land uses where the cover may or may not be appropriate at the moment. So a golden opportunity to go over all that, but a golden opportunity to get people's views and where it's going. We're really keen that we can impart the knowledge we've had in the past, and we've got some really good examples of regeneration, where tree planting has worked, where it's worked on farmland. So I think it's really critical to get those ideas across, and it's going to make them really valuable going forward.
Yeah, so their recommendations would then reach your ears in what form, and how would they be implemented? What's the process once it comes from them to you if they've got a recommendation?
Yeah, I understand from Chief Executive Nadine that the TAG's doing its work. It will generate its guidelines, but equally there are sectors in the economy who will have a channel. The Citizens Assembly will have a channel, and the council themselves will be the mixing ground for all of those views.
So it'll all make it to the councillors and come across the desk. Okay. wait a second. What are the sort of the visions and principles guiding TAG? And then I guess after those, we've talked about what success looks like, but how are you going to set achievable timeframes and indicators of success along the way?
Yeah, let me start with that one, Kerry. I mean, the vision is sustainable and resilient land use, particularly on that tough LO3B country. And there'll be a variety of inputs, and the transition advisory groups guidelines will be critical to that. But we're operating in a pretty dynamic contextual environment, as they say in Wellington. There's a whole lot of other things happening at the moment that we need to be conscious of. What's happening with the emissions trading scheme? That'll need to be taken into account. We'll need to work on a business case. As I said, looking forward to the Citizens Assembly having their input. We'll need bloody clear KPIs, particularly if we're heading for, hey, let's achieve our goal by 10 years, 1 decade. You've got to have very clear targets to work on that. So that implies very clear decision trees, very strong partnership with landowners, forester or farmers, working with them step by step around options, and then perhaps capturing those in a farm or forest plan. So you get all these little instruments in place, including the Tairāwhiti Resource Management Plan that will come together to work in concert to achieve that outcome that we're chasing.
Yeah, I think too that what we have there is not so long ago, farming was going to be required to have a freshwater farm plan, which outlines the risks you have on the property, a series of actions that you then prioritise to solve the problems you do have. Our problems in this region are predominantly sediment. We need that on all land uses in this region right now. You need to identify what our risks are, and it's not whether you're going to harvest land or not. If you're not going to harvest it, it becomes a risk, so we need to deal with actions for areas we're going to harvest, areas we're not, and prioritise it and how we're going to go forward. So as John says, a management plan of some sort is going to be crucial on properties to work through that. To make it work, we'll need incentives to do that. If there are not going to be incentives, the actions are going to occur very slowly, and we probably won't even tread water. We'll need incentives to pick us up and keep us moving forward.
Yeah, they established incentives in the forms of the ETS, right, to establish the first plantation pine here. How long did that take to kind of get an uptake? And are we likely to see the same again, or is it going to be hopefully faster movement?
With the ETS?
Yeah, well, so post-Bowler, it took a little bit of time to get some traction, didn't it, in terms of planting, and certainly land cover on 3A.
Yeah.
Took quite some time, except for those participants who were really, like, there's some active farms, but there was some...
Oh, there was some
long tail
grant assistance from the government at the time that basically looked at afforestation. So there were substantial amounts of money, and a high proportion of your costs were covered by that. So that came into being in the 1990s when we came through and saw the emissions trading scheme come along after that. And then we no longer have the likes of the grant assistance we had from Ministry of Primary Industries, but we really need something in that nature back, or some major realignment to where the emissions trading scheme sits at the moment in terms of both liabilities, but how we make it work in terms of incentives into the future.
You imagine, Shannon, if ETS in the review was able to front load carbon sequestered into Indigenous forest, and perhaps lightened the amount of sequestration 50 years out. So you met some of the hard costs up front, but over the average it was made no difference at all. And we're hoping that as they do the ETS review, they start thinking about these biodiversity credits, in essence, in disguise.
Yeah. But who are we hoping thinks about that, and how
well-
how are they getting the message? I guess. It's,
Well, this is part of where a role that the tag has. I think if we go to MPI as individuals to try and change the ETS, we're going to have problems. If we go as a unified group with a solution to how we're going to deal with our problems in this region and sell it on that basis, changing the ETS in terms of liability issue is we're not looking for a get out of jail free card. We're saying perhaps we could remove that liability if we get in and establish the right tree in the right place and have long-term sustainability on that land going forward. That's the incentive to have our liabilities removed. We need to be looking very carefully at that sort of process.
yeah, I mean, I'm getting a little bit cynical about that terminology of right tree, right place, because they've been bantering it around since the 1 billion trees fund, and right through the process, and it's still pine. It's
We need to match the vegetation to the land's capability, and that's exactly where we need to go, and it's exactly where the guideline development's going. We're setting up a series of options that will happen on specific types of land. There's no one size fits all here. We've got steep land, we've got wetter country, some at high altitude, some right down near the coast. So we've got a varied region, and there's going to be a need for a case-by-case assessment of all of it to get the thing right.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, people don't change their behaviours unless they've got very good information and they're convinced the change is justified. Hence, doing a little bit of side work, and Kerry's initiated this to compile a bibliography. So, and online, so that people can actually with ease have access to information around the best transition path for them. And you say right tree, right place. Well, which tree and why? And at what cost? And how do I look after them along access to that sort of information and advice from the council will help that path.
Yeah, I guess that's that data doesn't exist in our region right now, right? Some of the knowledge does, but the evidence of implementation doesn't exactly exist right now. How do we collect that, and how do we distribute it?
We have got a range of examples within our region where we've actually got it right. We just haven't got replicated on enough of the region. There's been some very good land practices that have gone on in the past. We've got some quite major riparian areas are working very nicely for us. We just haven't got enough of them, but what we need to use those areas for is research them really carefully, and so how we can replicate that across other parts of the region.
I can imagine catchment groups might work well too, because there's nothing like learning from your neighbour. And catchment plans, a digital record of progress in the river, critical chemical and biological parameters, so people can actually track, we're making a difference. I mean, all of that has to be part of the transition path. You see you're making good, then you keep on doing it.
Yeah, and I guess studying our history and implementing Te Ao Māori and integrating it, plus, not just looking at recent history, but further back into actions taken and celebrating our history in terms of both success and failure, so that we still consider those failures is important, I think.
Yeah, it's really pretty critical. Like we cleared this region so quickly. That didn't take that long, and a lot of land was cleared. The returns on farming at the time was really worthwhile. What we didn't realise is just how soft this region was, how vulnerable it is, and big rainfall events, once the indigenous tree roots rotted, gave us a pretty loud, clear message. A little bit late then, so we got all that vegetation off quickly, but then put a whole lot back on. Now we need to get the right species back into those right places. So we've got a lot of background there to deal with this, and it's a matter of moving on and achieving it. But there's no one size fits all to this. It's very much case by case. There's still highly productive farmland and forests on the right land. we just need to make sure we get that sensitive land into long-term vegetation.
And this is a all of community challenge, isn't it? And it's decades long, if not more, because we know that the growth cycle of these trees is a long time for native in particular, and then it depends on how soon we can get started. How long do we expect to be looking at this problem, and how do we pass it on intergenerationally so that people are participating at a high level and a conscious level?
Well, we've got to show our landowners and our community what actually works, how to make it work, but we're also very dependent on what weather conditions we get going forward. We're getting a lot of very intensive rains, they're very damaging. So our ongoing climate is going to dictate how fast we can move. So is any incentives to get the thing moving as well. So we're going to need incentives to get us to get up ahead of the game and keep moving and having all this happen. We're going to have a long period of time where trees are establishing in these vulnerable areas that it might be another species that comes down the river in a big rain because he's not established. But we need to get permanent vegetation established in those areas to combat the problem in the long term.
I see it, we've had 3 waves. Well, 4 waves. Indigenous land, big clearance, big patch, the bowler patch, the pine, and now we're into a new long-term game, the 4th and important wave. We need to have clear KPIs because it's too easy to say this will take forever. Hence the guidelines by April next year, and then there'll need to be a backfill of building the capacity and capability and understanding our taonga whenua, and sharing common goals. Hence us thinking about, despite the fact that to get a good Indigenous tree, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, to say, let's set a decade, have KPIs that are achievable and keep moving forward. Give the urgency, give the discipline, give the energy, give the resource to get going fast.
And let's prioritise the areas we need the change to occur on. So that'll come in 2 places where people are harvesting now. What are we going to do that into the future? But areas that we really need to transition out, and it may well be we don't harvest them, that we remove passively trees that are problematic, that could be poisoning, which there's some really cutting edge technology coming and how we're doing that. It is actually occurring in some parts of the country at the moment. So there's technology's going to help us on a lot of these things, but we're not going to fix it overnight, so we need to prioritise where we're going to go, what are the crucial areas, and take it in pieces in that manner. And we're only going to have a certain amount of plant material, labour, so we need to prioritise it.
Yeah, I think the last statement kind of takes me to where my passion is, which is more around people. Ultimately, the land cannot transition itself. The land cannot heal itself because we broke it. And we're talking about scientific research, solutions development, investigation, reporting on past successes, talking about technology holding solutions. You're talking about things that are outside of our existing workforce. Tairāwhiti currently has nationally some of the worst educational statistics in the country. We have a much, much higher percentage of those who lack any form of education, and we have very few people in the postgrad masters space. So we're overly represented in the workforce of unskilled jobs, and therefore most of our workforce is underpaid and under-resourced. That's the state of our people and the people who are expected to tackle this challenge. How do we bring education and development of our people along with this process so that we don't end up with another 10,000 labourers and no one who cares about the outcome because they don't understand the science, the development, the reasoning that is going into producing this solution.
So that's the realignment we need. And yeah, you're quite right. People are going to make this happen. We need to make it work on the land. There's going to be a whole range of different types of employment here. Pest control, monitoring where we're going, planting of different species. We've got to look at that as huge opportunities for our people. But it's like we need to make the change on the land now, but we need to make the change in our population to go alongside it. So there are real challenges, but now's the time to do it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's how do we have people who are invested in the roles that they're performing. People who aren't there because they want to break their back putting a spade to the ground and planting a seedling. It's people who understand biodiversity and the outcomes for the future, and how do we take a workforce of those who are invested and trained and knowledgeable in the field instead of a workforce who are simply there for the lowest cost of income.
So there's a real challenge here for us. We need to change the land, but we need to bring the people. Well, people need to make that happen, and it's an education and advocacy process we need to go through.
Yeah.
You know, we're in a time we need to make these changes, and there's a whole range of things we need to do, and we need to do them in the next few years.
Yeah, and I think and I hope that TAG's going to be the organisation or the group that really lead it from Tairāwhiti, because the reality is that if another region beats us to it, then it's likely the money will go elsewhere first.
Yeah, and I think the challenges we have here, and the challenge the government's got for our region, is we have got this huge problem. We need to make it very clear that that's a big problem we're going to need some help with. It is a real challenge. It's unique to Tairāwhiti. I spoke at the New Zealand Association of Resource Management conference about 3 weeks ago. We outlined what the TAG's about. Everyone's got a bit of an interest in it. We haven't got anything anywhere else in the country at the moment. Other people, perhaps other than Hawke's Bay, didn't get the fix we got. We've had these things in the past because of our soft rock geology, and we'll get them in the future. So everyone's keeping a bit of an eye on where we're going, and it's going to be really interesting to tell our story to them. That grouping, the Association of Resource Management, are having a look through our region early in the new year. I've got quite a few of them really keen to come and have a look at just how we're going to do this. We're going to try and get a bit of information out of those guys because they know what works in other region works very well. So yeah, you're quite right. We need to be making the change, but it's people and the land.
And strong leadership. I mean, your question was brilliant, Shannon. And we need leadership like that actually realises this is a whole community who are on transition. And we're blessed to have 30 really good people on our transition advisory group who are there as leaders and will sow the seeds of their good ideas further out to the community. We'll keep grow that. Our members of parliament, our ministers need to get this and run with us too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our TAG group's got some real visionaries on it. That's the membership is, we're all looking forward. We've all got we want a sustainable Tairāwhiti going forward. And they're locals with the background and with some really good solutions going forward.
Well, we do. We try to present the solutions here and come together at Exchange Cafe. And so if you had one challenge that you think is the biggest you're going to face, one from each of you during this transition process, it'd be lovely to know what it is. And then you might get some comments in the comment section of people willing to help with ideas. What's your biggest challenge, Kerry?
Well, the biggest challenge is getting the assistance to make this work. I think we've got the solutions, we've got the ideas. We need to put across what solutions are going to be good for Tairāwhiti, not have someone come in and explain how they're going to do it. We need to put those solutions there, but the incentive, getting that incentive to me is the big challenge.
Okay.
I would say, Shannon, communications. I mean, if you understand, you commit. So we've got to find ways of the work that we're all doing together. The kaupapa is described in ways that everybody says, yeah, I get that, I'm running with it. So communication, engagement, is sharing the load, so everybody's carrying a little bit of it going forward.
Great. So get the community on board, then get the government on board, and then we can all pull the walker in the same direction. Look, it's been wonderful to speak to you both. I get a really good concept of what TAG's doing now, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes that you produce. Hopefully we'll be able to have you back on after you've done a little bit more development, and we'll be able to hear some of the outcomes of your work. But thank you very much, and to our viewers, mā te wā, we'll be back soon with another episode of Exchange Cafe. Thank you. All good?
How did that go?